Hello and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So, in this episode I'll be discussing the fourth movie to be released in the Scream franchise, the 2011 movie Scream 4, as once again directed by Wes Craven and with Kevin Williamson returning for writing duties, with a number of script rewrites, I am led to believe, by Erin Kruger, who had undertaken the screenplay for the third movie in the franchise too. So, the family's back, if you like. Notably, and very sadly, this was Wes Craven's last film prior to his passing in 2015. And so it does kind of become a lot more poignant on that basis to kind of think that this was his last entry in, legacy, which really did start some 39 years, I think, if I'm right, prior to, to generating some of horror's greatest franchises, making his mark in the genre and becoming one of its very true masters, very much so. So, set some 15 years following the events of the first movie, Scream 4 sees the main focus of the previous movies and survivor, Sidney Prescott, as played once again by Neve Campbell, return to her hometown of Woodsboro. So we are back in Woodsboro, the scene of the original Ghostface massacre, to promote her new book. And after facing her fears and coming to kind of terms with the horrific events that have basically plagued and transpired in her past. In what seems like events coming back round to haunt her, as they always seem to do, and make her relive her worst nightmare all over again, somebody else has now taken it upon themselves to try out the Ghostface costume for size, which sees a new blood-filled massacre unfold once again around the town of Woodsboro. We then also catch up with Dewey Wiley, as played by David Arquette, who is now the town's sheriff, and Gail Weathers, as played again by Courteney Cox, who is feeling lost and uninspired, living the small town quiet life with Dewey after leaving the fast-paced world of journalism behind. Together with some new recruits, Sidney, Dewey and Gail must face, once again, piece together the clues and events as they unfold in order to determine who now dons the guise of Ghostface and put a stop to this fresh round of brutal killings. Now, poor Sidney, every time she thinks she's getting her life back on track, some clown in a Ghostface costume comes along and instantly everybody around her starts to die. And after a fourth outing for the Scream franchise, perhaps it could feel like this kind of merry-go-round of psychos, copycats and disenchanted cinema goers is starting to kind of wear a little bit thin. Well, Scream 4 is not perhaps the strongest entry in the series, but then it was never going to be, To top the effect of the first at this stage in the game would be a near-high impossibility. But what this movie does bring to the series and to the table is another eager-to-please, fun and gory whodunit mystery that kind of stands to serve as both a reboot and a continuation of the series. I think no matter what Scream film you're going to end up watching, the downfall of the series, that in the end, they are now all very formulaic. They can only kind of twist and turn so much within their own parameters. And whilst the first kind of offered something unique and kind of fresh for the discerning horror fan, putting the genre back on the mainstream map, so to speak, the rest, including the second, can never really kind of offer that same kind of shock value, It's not going to happen. It's a bit like Saw, it's the same thing. But it then kind of falls down to the delivery and the way in which each story is then being told, and that's what it's going to have to rely on. And again, this film, I think it does find the right balance for me in that respect, bringing together both the existing cast and some fresher, newer faces in another story that manages to pack more than a few punches of its own, and indeed some new and ingenious tricks up its sleeve. It does very well. This one takes a bit more things back to basics, We're back in Woodsboro, having left the dazzling lights of Hollywood behind, thank God. Being, of course, the setting for the third, and indeed we are now back with a tidal wave of real-world horror movie franchise references, this time examining the slew of remakes that had started coming out around about the same time. The fictional movie Stab series, as introduced in the second movie, still has a home, but this time around it is used to parody just kind of how ludicrous some of the horror franchises can actually get. I believe, as I think I've got this right, was set in space. Stab 4, set in space. Stab 7 is a movie within a movie, stemming from the events of Stab 6. And kind of so on, not too dissimilar from some very well-known horror franchises that are around. And I think in this respect, Scream 4 has a lot more kind of fun with the overall premise of the existence of stab, you know, without it kind of being overly saturating, whilst allowing the series to kind of take a nostalgic and kind of humorous nod back to its own beginnings, and indeed where it ended up, you know, with the third one. The classic touches are nice, and the movie doesn't shy away from its heritage, good or bad, and that is appreciative. And for me, this certainly played to one of its strengths, with, you know, the kind of classic Ghostface mantra mixed with some more modern technology and commentary on social media, and their perceived kind of fleeting nature and people's ever-growing thirst for fame on such platforms. Don't forget to subscribe. I wouldn't say that it was perhaps as suspenseful as the first two movies in the series, but it is certainly a major step up from the third. It's certainly eventful and a lot more gory this time around, bringing back the balance of horror and comedy and meta that really does fit this series so well. It was certainly nice to have the original trio back, absolutely, Sidney, Dewey and Gale, on whom the film is mainly focused from the very offset, which is good. There are some further kind of strong performances, and for me, the characters did seem to have been developed just enough between movies that I kind of feel that they kind of fit just right with where I thought they would have kind of been for the movie, given the kind of past experiences and involvement in the Ghostface massacre. So it all did seem fairly real in that respect, and again, fairly honest. There are a couple of strong roles within the newer cast as well this time around. One stands out in particular, and I think when you know who the killer is, you can certainly see kind of their character develop throughout the film. Their rationale does kind of whine on a bit at the end when they get there, like it kind of felt it was necessary to give us a statement of formal intent. But in the end, and throughout, when you know, the killer does give a good, no, fantastic performance, right to that very last. And I do think they picked a particularly strong base from which to kind of form their journey. They might not match the killer from the first movie, but they certainly bring a very psychopathic atmosphere that really does play well enough to keep things very interesting, especially as we head into that final act. The characters overall have a bit more backbone, but I think that kind of gives the film a more of a confrontational, almost action movie vibe. It does kind of stray a little bit, but it works, I think. And at least it's not just a bunch of people aimlessly running around in circles. This time around, Ghostface gets a run for their money, you know? We really don't get to see much of the newer characters, not some of them, until the second half. And so in some respects, development for many of them does feel a little bit stunted. There's a couple that are strong. Rest of them, yeah, kind of relying heavily on most of them kind of being mini-me's from the original cast, you know? Most kind of taking up a relatively kind of similar roles that we did see in the first movie. Some come into their own as the movie develops, but whilst I think that they did more than they did in the third movie for each of these characters, it's kind of still missing, I think, much of the emotional connection that we actually really need to kind of have these kills kind of mean and be worth something, you know? But it's a fun ride, a more modern take on the original premise with more up-to-date film references, bringing the meta to a more relevant standpoint. And indeed, this film certainly knows just how meta it is and makes no apologies for it. It even references the term, making great use of our expectations of the series and horror in general to be completely and deliberately deceptive from the get-go. However, I would admit, it does kind of get a little bit much when everybody is man and his dog does seem to know all of the rules of horror and everyone's a horror geek without real kind of no connection to the genre at all. Small price to pay. Overall, this is more than a worthy sequel, faring very much better than, in my opinion anyway, than the third entry, and with a decent roundup of characters, with a few, including those returning to the franchise, bringing some well-developed and earnest performances. We go back to the roots of the series, keeping things simple, and ultimately it does a decent job kind of tying it all together and bringing a whole kind of a remake vibe, you know? Keeping that remake vibe while retaining the qualities of the original and continuing this original legacy. Everything does feel like a comfortable fit for the series. I mean, by now any Scream movie is pretty much going to stick to a very similar base formula, but this entry manages to bring it home once again, whilst also kind of changing things up on its own with, you know, a good few new twists and turns. There's certainly some pretty cool and hair-raising Ghostface chases, and plenty of kills to kind of keep things moving towards the inevitable grand reveal. It does get a bit dramatic towards the end, but it's absolutely brilliant fun to kind of see everything unfold once again. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst Movie Talk, and definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.